Hello, hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie.
Good day.
Ooh. And we have a smorgasbord on tap for you here. I do not like the combination.
What?
Yeah.
Smorgasbords can't be on tap.
It literally means a table, right? A board refers to the table. I did not like the idea of a sort of blended up charcuterie coming out of the tap.
Disgusting image.
Pickled herring and some kind of Danish cheese all combined, just sludging into a glass. That is indeed what we have for you on today's episode. A lot of fights. I mean, we are genuinely, it appears, it snuck up on us because I got like false excitement like 5 weeks ago or more, where I was like, man, these cards are going to get good. And then they all sucked. They were all thoroughly mediocre. And now, without seeming to have realized it, we find ourselves smack in the middle between two quality Fight Night cards.
Yeah, I mean, they're not mind-blowing, but they're fine.
They're Fight Night cards. They're what they're supposed to be.
This is what I would want Fight Night cards to be.
Exactly. They're not supposed to be mind-blowing. They're more than acceptable. They are completely satisfactory as Fight Night lineups. And I say this while also having to acknowledge that neither Phil nor I have been able to muster much enthusiasm for the upcoming main event, which is not to say that it is not a good main event, that it is not a, the most deserving fight on the card, or that it isn't relevant to its division, but it does feature Grant Dawson, whose game we just don't like. It's just not particularly interesting. He's taking on Bobby Green next week at the Apex, so that's a bummer. But hey, at least it's a card that would get a crowd cheering if there was one. But there's a lot of... Oh, God. Can you hear that, Phil?
What is that? Oh, I can't, actually.
Okay, good. We'll see. Somebody started drilling something directly outside my window.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, we've had a painting crew outside the building looking at me in my underwear. I've refused to put more clothes on than I would normally.
Yeah.
As a point of pride.
Yeah.
You
like that?
Or rather a lack of shame. Anyway, we've got Dawson versus Green. Joe Pyfer is taking Abdul Razak Al Hassan in a suitably violent while meaningless middleweight co-main event. Alex Morono is taking on Joaquin Buckley. Drew Dober just getting another one in against Ricky Glenn. There's plenty of good stuff here. And then last week's card was similarly interesting enough from top to bottom, as a Fight Night card should be. And I think we're going to start with that and try to work ourselves up to being more excited about Grant Dawson, Bobby Green. Obviously, we love Bobby Green, but we're going to have to generate some enthusiasm for Grant Dawson. First up, let's talk about Mateusz Gamrot, Rafael Fiziev. We were quite confident that Fiziev would win this.
Yeah, we shouldn't. We should have reckoned with Gamrot's black magic and his ability to just win things,
which goes beyond persuading the judges.
Yeah, I mean, clearly his sort of realm of influence is expanding. And, yeah, someone's got to stop him. Only, as someone, accurately pointed out on Twitter, the only person who's been able to stop him has been Beneil Dariush, presumably using the power of Christ.
That's right.
Bryce Mitchell, obviously alert to the dangers of Satan in our midst.
Mm-hmm.
But Bryce Mitchell clearly not actually seeing what was right under his nose.
Mm-hmm.
Mateusz Gamrot.
That's right. It also suggests that because of Dariush's success, that perhaps part of Gamrot's success is down to the evils of Marxism.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I feel that this, along with, obviously, Karl Marx is in league with Satan. He is in hell, sitting at his right hand, or his left hand, as it were. Anyway, Mateusz Gamrot not only caused Rafael Fiziev's left knee to explode. His left knee, Dominic Cruz, not his right foot. His left knee, look at what he's holding. He's sitting there holding his left leg. He also looked good, I thought, in comparison. And I don't think this was necessarily because our read on the fight was totally inaccurate. I think our read on the fight would have been accurate perhaps a year ago. Because what this looked like to me was Rafael Fiziev in a 5-round fight for the second time. First one was against RDA, right? And I don't know how long Fiziev has been with Hoofed. I thought he was working with Hoofed now.
It did say that, yes.
But Zane Simon and I have noted this many times. Henry Hooft is not a coach who, he is not Mike Winklejohn. He does not sort of work with what he's given all the time. I don't know if this is 100% what happened, but this is a consistent thing with Hooft's fighters. That Hooft tends to make you do things correctly. That there is a proper way of throwing a jab, there is a proper way of moving your feet, and this is why Hooft's success rate is so high. I mean, he has to be, for years now, one of the most consistently successful striking coaches and overall head coaches in the game. Like, across the board, with like less talented fighters and very talented fighters, he just turns out really effective strikers. But he does...
just as an aside, I do find it like kind of amusing to think about the time back in the day, you know, after Rashad left to join, Jackson Wink to join Imperial Athletics or the Black Zillions or whatever the many things.
Yeah, it's got a fifth new name by this point.
Yeah. Killcliff, is it now?
Yeah, it was Hard Knocks 365 before it was Killcliff. Before that, it was Sandford. Before that, it was... It's Team Evil. Yes.
Team Evil. Just like the whole thing was like, what has Rashad done? Like, all of these guys had like high-profile losses. Admittedly, like they were all very high-level fighters, and that just happens. Almost, you have to, essentially to have consistent success at the top level, you just have to luck into having like an Alexander Volkanovski or a GSP. Like, it was like, this person lost a #1 contender fight, and it was against John Jones. So
yeah.
What are they going to do? Who could train Rashad Evans to beat John Jones?
Right.
But yeah, it was interesting at the time as the people were like, what's he done? The gym is just not it.
Yeah, they're all losing.
Yeah, nowadays Team Evil is undoubtedly a better gym than Winklejohn.
Yeah, is it still Jackson Winklejohn, even though Jackson only works with like one fighter every 3 years?
Yeah, that's why I sort of removed it from the
I think his name might still be on it, but yeah.
Yeah, but, and sort of alluding to your point, that was also one of the things that happened in the early going of that gym, is that the people in it picked up a bunch of losses.
Yeah. And this has been a thing that like Zane and I have never been able to ignore this pattern that like each time, sometimes like the really, really talented fighters will keep winning anyway, like Kamaru Usman. But there was a long phase of Kamaru Usman looking more awkward and uncertain on the feet than he had before he started working with Hooft. And this happens pretty much across the board. And it is also just a thing that happens even in, without Hooft's influence, when a fighter tries to sort of reconfigure their game and address an entrenched problem. And I think one or both of these things was happening with Fiziev in this fight, who was not getting, like, badly beaten by Gamrot, but was definitely, like, notably taking his time and not getting a lot going. And that is very different. Even if we look at his last 5-round fight against RDA, a more measured performance in some respects, but there was a lot of classic Fiziev, the guy who does everything at maximum intensity and then gasses out and then gets 1.5 minute of intensity per round for the rest of the fight. It didn't look like that was going to happen here, for better and for worse, because Gamrot was definitely winning in the stage of the fight where we would have thought he shouldn't be winning.
At least, yes, doing much better. I mean, in both cases, I think this was a much more measured performance from both men.
Yeah.
I mean, the main thing that we know about Gamrot is he just spams takedowns over and over again, and until they work, and then the other person gets up, and then he does it again, and he has infinite cardio, and that's what he does. He was very measured on the feet.
He was.
And went for his takedowns when he thought they were there. I thought his striking, I mean, it was kind of amusing, like, because the main thing you would have wanted from Gamrot is it's like you've got to do more than single strikes. You've got to throw more in with your work in more combinations, all this kind of stuff. It's like, what if I just throw my single strikes straighter with less telegraph, and I don't lunge in with them?
Yeah,
and that was kind of it.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, it's actually, but he's genuinely got quite a mechanically nice straight right, which we've talked about. Fiziev is not easy to hit.
Yeah,
and in neutral space.
And Gamrot's jab as well, I think, was more present here than it has been in previous fights. He's done a lot of that. Granted, I think this happens more against people who are pressuring him really hard, which Fiziev notably was not. But he does a lot more just trying to run people into that right hand in most of his fights. And yeah, here he was jabbing nicely. It was very much still almost all one and done. There was a couple 1-2s thrown in there. But they were well-chosen strikes from the right distance, good angles, and efficient, I have to think that another part of what was going on was perhaps the threat of Gamrot's takedowns. I think definitely contributed to the fact that he was hitting Fiziev so easily.
Yeah.
That Fiziev was in there adjusting to this. But I think, Fiziev would not have been in that I'm struggling to adjust to this mode had he taken a more classic approach. And may have won and made Gamrot a lot more uncomfortable, but may also have lost some bad rounds late. And I don't know. It looked like a growing performance from Fiziev. And
from both of them, to be honest.
I agree.
Both looked like they genuinely thought about what it means to try and win a 5-round fight against the guy they were up against.
Mm-hmm. But Gamrot's growing process looked pretty natural to him. He was
yes.
I think he was winning. I mean, and I think he was putting himself in very good position as a guy who always does well late in the fight anyway, even when he loses early. It's not like he was winning by virtue of burning a ton of energy that he would need later. He was just winning by comfortable but narrow margins efficiently.
I'm not sure if he. I don't know if he was winning.
I gave him the first round anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those rounds where I was just Zeev landed one picturesque flurry. I'm not really sure how much of it landed, and then landed a right hand when Gamrot was shooting in for a takedown. Mm-hmm. And I was just he's just going to win off the optics. There's not much to think I can't remember what the actual scorecard said, but I was
they weren't rendered. So.
Things which judges like.
Yeah, he also knocked Gamrot down with a big low kick at one point.
Yeah.
In the first round. These are definitely telltale things. But I thought he looked good, Gamrot. I thought he looked like he was mostly in control.
Yeah.
And then
it was just a shame that we didn't get to see any more of it.
Yeah, then Fiziev's knee exploded. Which, is definitely going to put a damper on his, whatever process of adaptation he might have been trying to go through here, if we're correct about that. So, I don't know. I get the sinking feeling that we may be seeing Fiziev as a guy who may have tried to make the adjustments too late in his career and now perhaps will never make them. Granted, he is a very good athlete. These guys tend to have much longer primes. But, everybody is susceptible to having an ACL or, I guess, which one's on the inside? Is that the
MCL?
MCL?
Anyway, I think it was the ACL that he said is gone. And he is only 30 still.
He is only 30, but still, I mean, that is at least a year's recovery. And one which could very much have a major impact on his ability to do things going forward. I've been told that like the lateral stability of your knee, even if it's not, even if it mechanically heals itself, will also there's a mental aspect to having felt your knee explode that can make fighters a lot more cautious about taking the same steps that they would earlier. And if there is a physical constraint, then I've been told it can affect your lateral movement, your pivoting, things like that. So we'll see. But hey, Gamrot keeps winning.
And now moves into a position where there's absolutely no one who's going to fight him.
Pretty much, yeah. Who wants to fight Gamrot? Even people who beat him, it's a miserable close fight, right? Unless you're Dariush.
Should Dariush fight him again? Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they could run back Gamrot Sarukian.
Sure. Maybe. I'm sure Sarukian would probably like that one back. It would perhaps be a breakthrough kind of thing for him. Then again, I don't know.
Other than that, it's basically Dan Hooker. There's no way. Like, I've heard suggestions that he could fight Michael Chandler because Chandler obviously isn't going to fight McGregor. There's no way Michael Chandler is accepting a fight against Mateusz Gamrot.
No, I don't see why he would. Chandler has been all money fights and action fights since he's been in the UFC. So
he will fight McGregor, or he will angle for the loser of Oliveira against Makhachev.
Well, speaking of dark powers and the agents working to defeat them, Bryce Mitchell was in the co-main event. He and his Bible. They together took on Dan Ige. I can't even get into the insane shit that Bryce Mitchell was saying around this fight. He did the conspiracy about the space lasers starting the fires in Hawaii.
Of course, yes.
He framed it as this is the government, I guess, trying to, well, he didn't say who, but it's the government or the Jews. It's one of those. They're trying to get rid of the native, or to take land from the native people. And I don't know if Bryce has heard, but I think they already did that.
Yeah.
130
Famously.
years. 130 years ago. I think Hawaii had a queen and they deposed her. I'm pretty sure this land has been successfully annexed. But hey, now apparently we need space lasers to build resorts on sacred native land, because we didn't know how to do that before.
I mean, you got to use your space lasers for something, and why not the real estate industry?
It doesn't add up to me. I got to be honest. It's a bit convoluted.
Really shocking.
It's a bit convoluted, even for a conspiracy theory. But while Bryce Mitchell is getting, I don't think it's deniable, he is getting increasingly unhinged. He also had the interview that week where he was screaming at Michael Bisping for saying he believed in evolution.
And gravity.
Oh, God, no. Mm-hmm. He doesn't believe in gravity?
No. He said he was what? He was and then why does a helium balloon not fall to the ground? It's got mass. Gravity attracts mass. Because there's air in the way, Bryce Mitchell.
Oh my God. The thing is if you wanted these insightful questions answered, you would get a satisfactory answer that would put your mind at ease immediately. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. But you don't want somebody to explain it when you ask a question like, why doesn't a balloon fall to the ground? I don't know, Bryce. Where does the wind come from? Another question that could definitely be answered if you cared, if you had any genuine curiosity about these things.
Anyway, what you were going to say is that he's been getting more insane,
but he hasn't been getting better.
Yes, that.
And that is no longer possible to ignore. I was quite high on Bryce Mitchell. I have really like banged the drum like, man, this guy's good. I've been super impressed. I cannot ignore that this fight was very much in line with his last one. In that Bryce Mitchell appears to have sort of one approach to striking. That does not necessarily feed very naturally into his ground game. And while he can be shockingly effective as a striker, it is not a particularly principled striking game. That he is a fighter sort of like Israel Adesanya, though not very different in style. But what I mean is that he has a striking game which is really comprised of a lot of tricks rather than anything particularly systematic. And I really think that this was Dan Ige's fight to lose. That was not how I saw it going in, but as it was playing out, I was like, oh, wait, like Dan Ige can win this fight. And I really think it comes down heavily to Dan Ige's decision-making that he did not win this fight. Mm-hmm. Because I think a couple of very small adjustments, ones I believe that his corner were asking for, would have cemented him a win, which, by the way, I don't think it would be insane to give Dan Ige the decision in this fight anyway.
I mean, again, it's one of those ones where, well, firstly, Mitchell wins the only super clear round.
Yes.
Which automatically makes it more likely that he's going to win.
Yep.
And, yeah, secondly, it's just like, yeah, you give up takedowns towards the end of the round, you... like, they're not supposed to score those things, but you know they do.
Yeah.
So yeah, like in a perfect world, maybe like if Danny Gay had won this fight, I would have been like, yeah, good. It would have been one of those ones where,
yeah,
I was like, oh, the guy I like won, and he did sort of rob the other guy. No, it was very competitive, and he did do more damage.
Certainly.
And, yeah, it was just he got a little tunnel visioned.
Yeah, so what is that? What you saw, I'm guessing, the same sort of things that I did. What do you mean by that?
Well, so I think the main thing is that, like, right at the beginning of the fight, Dominic Cruz, you know, as soon as people are talking, you know, he's suddenly, you know, in on the stance matchup, he's like, both of these guys are going to be looking for their rear straight.
Yeah, of course.
Looking for the backhand from both stances. And, like, about 1 minute later, I was just like, one of these guys is looking for those things. Because Ige was just walking Mitchell with the left hook and the left hand.
Yeah, go figure.
Like, the whole time. I mean, essentially, it virtually blinded Mitchell by the end of the fight.
Yeah.
And the problem is that he just couldn't stop himself from going for it as the fight went on. Because, I mean, presumably he was hitting this guy super hard and getting, you know, feeling like he was getting close to putting him away. And he knew he couldn't see the punch, but just couldn't stop himself, like, loading up on huge left hooks, and then Mitchell would double change under it, and then pick up again, he's a really good grappler. Like, he'd pick up an insane grappling sequence, and then would sort of come close to winning the round.
Yep. Yeah, no, that part of Mitchell's game, undeniably, you know, as impressive as it ever was. His takedowns are quite varied. I mean, that is obviously a huge strength for anybody in modern MMA who was trying to pick up rounds on, like, aggressive, positionally dominant grappling. And but just his grappling in general, like the sequence that really stood out to me was when I was damn sure Ige was about to slip out of back mount.
Yes, that's the one. I think everyone was just like, "Oh yeah." I mean, the commentators, they were just like,
"Yep, he's out.
He's out."
Yeah, Dan Ige was successfully turning in, and Bryce Mitchell just has an uncanny ability to find. I don't know what somebody who really knows what they're talking about with grappling would call this, but I often, as an outsider, more or less, I often fixate on like points of control, anchor points. You know, like a Kimura lock, like a figure 4 lock, is like an anchor point that can transition to a variety of sweeps and submissions. You know, a Kimura could be a triangle, it could be an armbar, it could be a Kimura, it could be a sweep, it could be an omoplata, it could be any number of things, and you can find that kind of anchor from a number of different positions. And Bryce Mitchell is just really, really good at getting an anchor and manipulating it. And in that position, he had, I think, a 2-on-1 on Ige's far side arm. So as Ige was trying to turn into his guard, he just couldn't. His wrist was being controlled. I suppose it was actually the near side wrist was being controlled, so he could not completely turn through. And this was like sort of like an inverted version of how Mitchell's top game works. I'm always talking about his preference for these sort of positions where, like, you have a clear direction where you want to go, but he has something prepared to meet you, and your options are limited because he is otherwise controlling you. And that anchor on the right wrist of Dan Ige stuck Ige in this like transitional position just long enough for Bryce Mitchell to basically reach over his back with his leg and slip a hook in. And wouldn't you know it, despite not being correctly oriented, Bryce Mitchell effectively regained back mount with one of his shoulders on the mat, and Dan Ige mostly on top of him. Just really, really crafty, and really crafty on the ground. And it's what made because otherwise Dan Ige was doing a really good job of stuffing his takedowns. Like that, to me, right from the outset, I was like, that's a really good sign for Dan Ige. He's sprawling well. He is just crushing Bryce Mitchell's head to the floor very quickly, not allowing him to build up or generate any drive at all. But each takedown Mitchell did get was just like, that was it. That was the rest of the round.
Yeah, the exact opposite to, like, a Gamrot.
Exactly, yeah. So, otherwise, I thought not only the left hook, because Dan Ige was landing some right hands as well. The one of the shots, he hit Bryce Mitchell on the other eye, the one that I think wasn't swelling shut, with a right hand. That was a pretty telling blow. I thought the tunnel vision for me was more in that, as you said, he was loading up. Like, he really should have just taken some steam off of his shots. I think Dan Ige has now discovered the dark side of having realized that he is an effective power puncher, and that he just doesn't need to do that all the time. That his shots are effective and meaningful even when he isn't throwing hard. But also, he was headhunting so much with either hand, and this was so distinctly a fight where all he had to do to keep winning, because he was winning on the feet. Not by like massive margins. Like, realistically, it was 2 or 3 big shots a round, but they were clearly the biggest shots of the round. He was winning comfortably on the feet. All he needed to do to cement a win here was to not get taken down. And so he should have been throwing body punches.
Yep.
Both because Mitchell was also getting tired.
Yes.
Which is another thing that stands out. He said he had the flu or something in his last fight, and that's why he got tired. Well, I think we're starting to realize that getting pressured by a dangerous striker also makes Bryce Mitchell tired, and having to chase a bunch of takedowns that he can't get. His style is not particularly efficient. And he does not give up on. He doesn't do a exploratory takedown attempts. Each time he goes for one, he will try to see it through to the end. It's why he's so effective as a wrestler, that he will continue attacking different legs, different angles, continue driving for as long as he's in contact with his opponent, but it's inefficient. And he looked tired after the first round of this fight. And yet Dan Ige, I don't think, threw a single body punch. And very few combinations of any kind. Very few jabs. I think he just swung hooks, really, and the occasional straight right at Bryce Mitchell's head.
Yeah. I think the fact that it was so effective was one of the things that kept luring him into it. He was just like, it's going to work soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he'd just taken a little step back, just jabbed him up and thrown jabs to the body and a long right and a long right. Sorry, a jab to the face and a long right to the body.
Yeah.
And just racked up points from range and waited for, and then pulled the takedown out of Mitchell rather than swinging into it.
Yeah. Uppercuts to the body. I suspect part of this was that Bryce Mitchell fought almost entirely on the back foot, and Ige's just not as good there. Mm-hmm. What I mean is Ige's not as good coming forward. I think he's a bit of a Ross Pearson. Somebody pressures him, and he's quite comfortable. He uses his jab well. His defense is pretty solid. He counters really well. And generally throws much tighter, more efficient punches in that mode. He moves his feet a lot better. This was a bit like watching another natural counterpuncher in Kaikar, France, coming forward. Mm-hmm. Or like watching other New Zealand guy who's no longer in the sport. Why am I forgetting his name?
I don't know.
Brad Riddell.
Oh, yes. Is he not?
I think he retired.
Oh, yeah, of course.
He at least took a hiatus.
Yeah.
It's like watching Brad Riddell come forward, where he's got some idea of how to do it, but really all of the beauty of his style, it's not present when he feels that he should be pressing forward on his opponent. He loses his stance. There are guys who look very natural as pressure fighters, like Ilia Topuria, who keep their feet under themselves, who gather distance in with small steps and using their jab and using their feints. And then there are these counterpunchers who seem to default to just kind of swinging and falling towards people, ironically putting themselves in position to be countered, which in this case Dan Ige was with takedown attempts. So I think that was probably part of it. Worse decision making because it was a less familiar sort of context for Dan Ige's boxing, but also he could have won this fight. And I think that is a bit of an indictment on Bryce Mitchell. That going forward, more people are just going to pressure him. And they're going to know to look out for the level changes. And if somebody's takedown defense is simply up to snuff, they are going to wear the fuck out of Bryce Mitchell just walking him backwards and banking rounds with just really a couple clean strikes will be all they need, because otherwise Mitchell's just not comfortable and frankly just has bad body language. Even if he's not outright losing, it doesn't look like he's winning when somebody is pressuring him that hard.
Yeah. I mean, there aren't that many people for Bryce Mitchell to fight now who aren't going to be challenging in one way or another. It's basically...
Right.
I think his best bet is Iga Chikadze.
Yeah, almost certainly. Which still sounds like a potentially very dangerous fight, but yeah.
Josh Emmett, should he be okay?
Yeah.
I feel would probably be exactly as troubling as Dan Ige, just with better takedown defense.
Yeah.
Movsar Evloev.
Evloev would pressure him and is very difficult to out-wrestle.
Would jab him up, presumably.
Cater would pressure him messily, but effectively. Topuria obviously was already a nightmare. I think it could very well be a fight where Arnold Allen turned on pressure mode, even though it's not really the thing he's best at either.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I say? Fuck it. Just give him Max Holloway. Let's find out once and for all.
Mean.
Yeah, we'll find out. We'll find out who is truly blessed in that battle. But yeah, I think very much cools my jets when it comes to Bryce Mitchell. This performance combined with his last one.
Yep, it does look like he's reached a little bit of a plateau.
Yes. Doesn't mean he couldn't make some adjustments, but being that he is obviously such a fundamentally incurious and insane person. I don't know how well that transposes to this specific aspect of his life or how well that relates, but maybe he won't make the adjustments he needs to make for whatever is going wrong in his life in whatever sphere. All right, let's take a break on that note. When we come back, are we excited about Grant Dawson yet?
No.
Well, we'll try our best. Grant Dawson, Bobby Green, and then we are, as I said at the top, we're just going to get into all the interesting stuff from these two undercards that we have time for after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. What was that?
Watch more Grant Dawson.
We're
talk about him so he can go away.
We're watching Grant Dawson. I wish I'd been recording for the series of just the dispirited moans of a broken man that came out of Phil's mouth just before, which was just that's what it sounds like when a man who really still loves things about life, or at least is clinging on to a few things to love about life, is then asked to watch a series of Grant Dawson fights.
He's not good.
He's not good, is he? But he is.
Yeah, he is. Like, objectively, he has to be.
But he's not. He's so bad.
He's not winning fights in a funny way.
No. It's the antithesis. It's yeah. There's definitely a healthy subset of good bad fighters.
We love our bad fighters who win fights anyway.
Absolutely.
That's one of our things.
Yeah. And
Dawson, man.
He doesn't look like he should be winning, but he does in the most miserable way imaginable. And yes, this is an episode. Maybe I don't know, is there a person out there who's like because I've bitched about, I've gotten heat, mostly from, like, weird nationalist guys, but I've gotten heat for, like, complaining about, Khabib fights and stuff, or Islam fights in the past. Like, of course, I'm like an Islamophobe because fundamentally I just don't find grappling as interesting. But, I can appreciate a good grappling style. And obviously, I appreciate Bryce Mitchell's ground game. And I do appreciate Khabib's. And certainly seeing Islam go out there and start finishing people more, it's awesome. But is there a person who's so into the idea of grappling being the thing that should win fights that they've tricked themselves into enjoying Grant Dawson? Let us know in the comments, folks. Let us know on Twitter or in the comments. Do you like Grant Dawson's fights? Do you enjoy watching him fight? Because I can't imagine that anyone does. There is something so unaesthetic about the way Grant Dawson gets his wins. Let me tell you what happened. Grant Dawson got tuned up on the feet by Jared Gordon. He got knocked down in the first 20 seconds by Swedish wrestler Mark O. Madsen, who just 1-1-2. Grant Dawson stuck both hands out, backed him right into the fence, and just got sat down. And then within a minute, he was on Marco Madsen's back, which is more or less where he was for the rest of the fight. So this is the thing with Grant Dawson. He is just a guy who looks woefully out of his depth the entire time until he is in a control position where he will not finish his opponent unless it's very late, and will do very little except hold on to the... He is just a red-faced body triangle tapping you in the nose with meaningless punches from that position machine.
Mm.
I hate it. I actually hate watching it.
He's so just powerfully generic as well. There's so little of him that jumps out as anything beyond like a creator fighter character from like a UFC game, one of the bad ones. And yeah, it's just, that's it. He just stands there looking unbelievably clunky at range and mostly getting smoked because he's the most awkward man in the world. And then he'll just blunder in and get a takedown, and then he's actually genuinely good at picking up back takes, and then he just sits there for the rest of the round.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Exhausting.
Why can't he fight Ahmed Sarukian? Sarukian would fuck him up.
Right.
Instead he's fighting old Bobby Green. You know what, I'm going to pick old Bobby Green to beat him. Why not?
Yeah, I think I'm going to spitefully pick Bobby Green as well. I mean, let me say this. There is obviously a universe in which Bobby Green does beat Grant Dawson. I will say right now that because the universe is cruel and cares not for my immortal feelings, that this probably won't happen. That Bobby Green has definitely been swamped by Grant Dawson types in the past. That being said, generally slowly out-wrestling Bobby Green is not the way to beat him. He is a very good defensive wrestler. He's a pretty great wrestler across the board. Unless you're the hyper-aggressive version of Islam Makhachev, it's hard to make him look bad on the ground. But then, I would have said the same thing about Damir Ismagulov.
Exactly, yes, this is the problem.
And then again, I would say the same thing about Ricky Glenn, who is in a lot of other ways, a much worse fighter than Bobby Green. Glenn is glacially slow. And really can be taken down a lot more decisively early than Bobby Green usually is. But once Glenn sort of warms up into a fight, he is also he is a really difficult guy to continually tangle up with. He's got long limbs. He's really good at breaking your posture as you try to take him down. And he's a very insistent, counter-attacking scrambler. So the trouble with Glenn is that you will not get a superior position by virtue of him trying to escape the wrestling sequence. If you chase it super doggedly, which is Grant Dawson's MO, then Glenn is a guy who will try to squash you and get on top. And late in that fight, because this is the other thing with Grant Dawson, his style is so horrifically inefficient that he has gassed late into many fights, ones where the opponent has been able to keep him fighting, basically, after that first successful takedown attempt. And Glenn was fucking thrashing him later in that fight because of this. How much is that like Bobby Green, realistically? Because obviously we want Bobby Green to win. That's really why we're going to pick him.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I mean, and admittedly, you have actually nailed it. You found a Grant Dawson fight that I want to watch. It's one round. It's the last round of Dawson versus Ricky Glenn.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's great. Especially a perfect dessert to having watched a bunch of other Grant Dawson fights. Except that it leads to a draw because it's only one extremely decisive round against two where Grant Dawson is doing his miserable best to suck the fucking life out of the arena.
It suddenly relieves some of the mental pressure of trying to resolve the Grant Dawson paradox. It's that you're just watching him the whole time and you're like, but he sucks though. And then you watch the end of that fight and you're like, yes, he does.
I'm not crazy. He does suck. Look, this is what it looks like when a guy who sucks fights a guy who's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, so picking Bobby Green for no reason. 5 rounds probably. I mean, this is the thing. It's like he's many times when Dawson has been getting beaten up, he's found like a last surge of energy.
Yeah.
Like against Jared Gordon. Like Jared Gordon is fucking him up in the 3rd round, and then Dawson it's like, you know what I should do? I should go to my secret weapon. I should take him down and then take the back. And just forced it through. And won. But so like he can push through. He is dogged.
Absolutely. That is his whole thing. It's the only reason his style works.
Bobby Green is old. But on the other hand, I think that, of all the styles that will gas someone like Dawson out on the feet, Bobby Green's is perhaps the most likely to do so. Because it's a constant thing of, twitches and feints for him to overreact to. He's less of a pure counterpuncher than Ismagulov can be. I still, you should, any sane person, you should be picking Bobby Green to get tired out and to just have endless rounds of this horrible.
It is a kind of fight.
Man sitting on his back.
It is a kind of fight that Bobby Green will hate. And when Bobby Green is having a miserable time, sort of like Robbie Lawler, you might get some moments of pure rage. But Bobby Green is a guy who is susceptible to frustration. And this is why, yes, Bobby Green is going to lose. But we're imagining a universe in which he doesn't, in which Grant Dawson is exposed for being the thoroughly one-dimensional fighter that he is.
Get him, Bobby.
Get him. Yeah, I mean, he could, if he can stop the takedowns. And this is the other thing about Grant Dawson. He will hit one impressive takedown per fight. Usually this is a product of having worn his opponent down and gotten... I mean, this is the thing. Grant Dawson hits such ugly shots on people. He has a bit of and please don't take this as praise, he has a bit of Damian Maia's wrestling game in him. Grant Dawson, this is a strength of his. He does not need the initial shot to succeed at all. He will put himself in a horrible position shooting. I mean, I think it's half the reason he got knocked down by that right hand from Marco Madsen. I think he felt his ass hit the fence, and he was right at the beginning stage of initiating a hideous level change when he got caught. So he was basically he was doing the Dracus Duplessis reactive shot. Where he just sort of sits down, and if you touch him in the middle of the chest, he will just fall onto his butt. And he got hit while he was starting to bend down without any forward drive. But if he can get down and latch onto your legs, it tends not to matter. Because Grant Dawson will go to his ass, he will fall on his side. As long as he can stay clasped on one leg, he will continue working. And this is indeed what happened even in the Madsen fight where he was knocked down. He still latched onto that single, and just like Damian Maia, he got a single from a half guard position and just wormed his way up. He's extremely persistent, and he is strong. He is physically strong. Less so, I think, at lightweight than he was at featherweight, but at featherweight, his gassing problems were worse. He looks a lot more consistent at lightweight. And so he will just stay attached, keep his hands clasped, and work really hard. And because of this, you will see one cool foot sweep from Grant Dawson per fight, where the opponent is so exhausted mentally and physically from dealing with this disgustingly tenacious wrestling game that they will just be a sucker for some surprise move. So, he's got a reasonably full arsenal that sort of complements the hideous A game he likes to play.
Yeah. I mean, just, the idea of being someone who just synthesizes, a flyweight type Formiga-esque, just back-take-focused game, control game, with an actual, coherent wrestling approach. I mean, it's just working like magic.
But it's still it's such a, the thing is it's also like, he also reminds me, he's a lot less fun, but of Claudio Silva, had a similarly just all-out hideous wrestling game. His was still a lot more dynamic, and it also exhausted him because this is just an exhausting way to fight. But it is also precisely what got him cooked by Ricky Glenn late in that fight, because Dawson is always willing to start from an inferior position in a wrestling sequence. I think in the third round, he went for a reactive shot on Glenn and essentially just gave it up, which he does, like Damian Maia used to do. He's not going to push too hard because all that matters is he's connected to you. He's made contact, the takedown will come. And by that point, he had lost enough energy, and Glenn had seen enough of this that Glenn was just able to squash him to the mat and get on top of him and stay there for the rest of the round. So there is absolutely a fight coming down the pike in which Grant Dawson's tenacious style is the very thing that gets him beaten. Oh, I actually forgot that Ricky Glenn more or less choked Grant Dawson unconscious at the end of that fight too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, when he was pointing at him and he was like, look, he was out.
Yeah, and James Krause runs over and he's like, Grant, you're awake. I placed a bet on you. You can't be unconscious. He comes over and pulls him back to his feet and puts on a good cornering generally from James Krause. He makes sure it's as clear as it can be that Dawson's fine. He wasn't out.
Yep.
Boy, I forgot about that. He basically darsed Grant Dawson unconscious at the end. God, 5 more seconds and the fate of the universe could have been changed. We wouldn't have Grant Dawson versus Bobby Green in the main event. But there is a fight coming around the bend, especially as Grant Dawson gets 5-rounders, where he exhausts himself. He can't change his tendency to start from horrendously bad positions, and suddenly the tenacious takedown sequences just stop materializing. Top position stops materializing from those sequences.
Also, there's just multiple style matchups that we haven't seen him in at all. He's very focused on controlling the body, which against everyone he's fought, they've just been trying to fight off the takedowns. Is he good at not being guillotined? I mean, admittedly, he is a generic person without much of a neck, but we've never seen anyone with a submission game fight him.
Well, like I said, it was late in the fight, but Glenn just nearly darsed him. I mean, he did catch him in the front head, not a guillotine, but a front headlock choke. And also, somebody will just knock Grant Dawson out. Maybe that's Bobby Green. That would be cool. He does that.
Bobby Green, shut up.
He does that occasionally. He can be very sharp early. He has been in a lot of his recent fights, but he has also, I don't know. He's also been inconsistent in a lot of his recent fights, and you got to wonder if the extreme threat of a takedown will hamper some of that. I don't know. Fuck Grant Dawson. I'm picking Bobby Green.
Yeah, no. Bobby Green's going to win.
He is going to win, isn't he?
He's just going to be pushing Grant Dawson around the cage, taunting him.
Yeah.
Grant Dawson's going to be gassed out. He's going to be bright red.
Yeah.
And Bobby Green's going to submit him off a panic shot.
Yeah. Bobby Green loves submitting people.
Yes.
He has actually done it 9 times. It's more than I thought.
Yeah. Didn't he do it to Jacob Volkman?
Yes, good memory. He submitted Jacob Volkman as recently as 2013.
See, he's going to do that again. Jacob Volkman was also extremely annoying.
That's true. Volkman really was a Grant Dawson. This is a game that will continue to work in MMA. If you can just be tough and extremely determined and annoying. But Bobby Green did beat Jacob Volkman. That actually gives me a small glimmer of hope. Granted, it was 10 years ago, and Volkman was not as physically imposing as Grant Dawson. But
get him, Bobby.
Get him. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, the rest of this card is a lot less dispiriting than that. Alex Morono, Joaquin Buckley, Drew Dober, aforementioned Ricky Glenn. I even like Alexander Hernandez, Bill Algeo. That should be kind of fun. Oh, Kovalkiewicz is back. She's fighting an opponent who doesn't particularly matter, but I enjoy Carolina's game. We've also got a couple other things. We'll see if this makes it into bonus episode territory, but there's a couple things from last week's card as well. Marina Rodriguez, Michelle Waterson-Gomez was meaningless, but Charles Jourdain, very enjoyable fight, as always, against Ricardo Ramos. Tim Means got what I sincerely hope is his last win ever, and I don't mean that I hope he loses. I hope it's his last fight. I hope it's his last fight. You know, like Andre Fialho should not look like a near miss or a near thing. Tim Means is an old man.
Yeah,
oh, and Muhammad
it's a good
Usman.
one to retire on.
Muhammad Usman betrayed us. He kind of looked all right. We're going to talk about those after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. I suppose we should start off by looking forward. Alex Morono, Joaquin Buckley is around the bend here in the third slot from the top. We're not going to talk about Joe Pyfer, Abdul Razak Al Hassan, just because it's just it'll be great, but it's just a stupid action fight. Morono Buckley. Do you, I can't recall, Phil, I get you and Zane mixed up as my two podcast co-hosts. Do you also like Alex Morono?
Yeah. He's cool. How can you not like Alex Morono?
Yeah, he seems like the kind of guy you would like, right? Like he's weird.
Yeah, he's just very he's very studious and kind of and not particularly coordinated, and he's clearly thinks about what he's doing and just isn't all that amazing at executing it because he's Alex Morono.
But he's shockingly good at executing it, which is, that is the endlessly endearing thing about Morono, is that he's not a good athlete. Not just in the... Because he can actually be reasonably quick, and he's got decent power. He has like some of those things you might consider physical athletic traits. The coordination, the most overlooked aspect of athleticism... but one that, like, when you see it, you know what you're seeing. Like, oh, this dude could do a backflip without having ever attempted one before. He just knows how his body works. He feels it. He can feel where each limb is. This guy could be 3 sheets to the wind and touch his nose without missing. This is a man with great proprioception. Morono doesn't have that. His movements are very awkward. He is borderline straight-legged in his stance. He just does not have athletic movement in him. But his game is pretty well put together. I mean, he uses his jab very diligently. He is a pretty intuitive counterpuncher. He will work the body. He can check kicks. Like, he moves his feet, not like, again, with great coordination, but he does take good angles, and he moves a lot. So there's a lot to like. Alex Morono is our classic kind of guy, an untalented but diligent fighter. And he's taking on not necessarily his polar opposite, but in some ways.
No, that would be Abdul Razak Al Hassan.
Yes, like absolutely. Or Chaos Williams, who notably... KO'd Alex Morono while being, in most ways, a much worse fighter. But Buckley is certainly a far more physically talented fighter than Morono, with the exception of the fact that he is little. But
he's not so little now that he's down a weight class.
That's true. Buckley is strong. He's fast. He's explosive and powerful, and he has. The reason I say he's not a polar opposite is that there is a diligence to Buckley's game.
Mm-hmm.
Like he is well.
He does lots of things you would like to see. He punches into kicks. He goes to the body. He works in combination. It's just,
he's rote.
All of this stuff. Yeah.
He's very
it's just that like it's very start and stop, and it's very straight line. It's like when Buckley is attacking, he is attacking until he is done. There is nothing, and it's always going to be coming straight forward, and it's always going to be punching a whole bunch, throwing a whole bunch of shots. Yeah, and then he's done for that little burst. Yeah, there's no like staying in the pocket and and defending. There's not really that much angling out. No. He's in some ways he's one of those people where it's things you want to see from MMA fighters, putting together combinations and going to the body and all this other kind of stuff. But again, like say with Rafael Fiziev, sometimes you're just like maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more one and done. Yeah, or like those things, but with like nuance, it's kind of unusual, this fight, in that it is the extremely unathletic guy who feels like the far more organic fighter. Yeah. That Morono is like in there feeling his angles, feeling his range, dictating fights without having to work super hard, mostly using his jab and his footwork. And Buckley is a guy who sort of very clearly decides what combination he's going to throw and then just does it all the way. And as you said, very much straight lines. Defense has been a critical failure for Buckley on more than one occasion. He has been knocked out more or less cold on 3 occasions because people pick up on both the patterns of movements, that, okay, he's going to throw this shot and then slip in this direction, like I'm going to kick him in the head. Or they have been able to, or they have picked up on the timing, which, like early days Josh Emmett and, well, still current days Josh Emmett on a bad night, Buckley has all this intensity and force and speed, but it is all exactly the same. There is no feel. There is no, I'm going to throw this shot half power. I'm going to flick in a feint in the middle of this combination. I'm going to use this shot just to get myself into a better position to throw the next shot. It is surging straight forward, mostly right, left, whether it's kicks or punches. Everything same power, everything same exact tempo. And so Buckley is predictable. Is that enough for Alex Morono, as I'm sure we would both like? Nothing against Joaquin Buckley, but is that enough for the guy who is more our type of fighter to get it done here? It's a weird one, because, Buckley just isn't... He's one of those fighters where he's just not as potent as you would expect him to be, right? Yeah. Given all that kind of stuff, given how incredibly physically dominating he is, despite the what's it called? The obvious famous knockout of Sanganai. He hasn't actually finished all that many people.
And they're mostly people that you're like, yeah, of course he finished that guy. Like Jordan Wright exactly. And Andre Fialho, like guys who are notably fragile.
Yeah, exactly. And meanwhile, he has been finished by Jackie Gosh, apparently, whoever that may be. I don't know. I find myself, on the one hand, I actually feel like Morono is going to be able to effectively counterpunch Buckley as he comes forward with one of his wild blitzes. He could possibly even hurt him. Also, Also, I just feel like sometimes Buckley just gets it into his head that he wants to wrestle, and I'm sure he can just do that because he's just much stronger than Alex Morono.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to pick him to do that. I think I'm going to maybe not pick him to finish Morono, or maybe not even win the stand-up. But I think if he thinks about it, he's just going to be like, you know what? I think I can just take this guy down, and I think he probably can just take him down.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought as well. I do think there's absolutely a version of this fight where Morono does his hinky impression of Kevin Holland, and just sticks Joaquin Buckley on the end of a lot of jabs, and maybe works him with some kicks to the body and legs from far away, and then Buckley surges forward and he cracks him with a left hook or a right uppercut on the counter.
Yeah.
But Buckley has been more and more invested in wrestling. And that is really a great weakness of Alex Morono's. Which is not to say that he isn't a capable, well-rounded grappler, that he doesn't know how to stop a takedown. That is one of the things where just the speed of reaction is not there. And also, he's in such an awkward fundamental position that, if you connect on a good shot. One thing I will say, I don't know if Buckley knows how to control people.
No.
So maybe him getting takedowns is not enough to win. Because Morono will be quite aggressive off of his back. He will not be as good at scrambling as a better athlete like Andre Fialho, who Buckley did look to take down multiple times. He's not going to be as quick on the scramble, but he will be really aggressive and will give Buckley reason to think, okay, time for the next position. Buckley might be the one on top initiating the scrambles, and that could be enough for Morono to repeatedly get back to his feet without having spent too much time stuck on his back. I'm going to pick Morono because I like it more.
Yeah.
This is the episode of picking your favorite, which is what we do anyway, but I'm not going to pretend.
Yeah, no, I think it's more than possible.
Yeah.
For Morono to win this one. I think it's really a pick 'em because the main thing is just Morono is one of those guys who's better than he should be, and Buckley is frankly one of the guys who's worse.
Yeah.
And you can just never really tell how that's gonna play out. But I think splitting the difference between Buckley just landing some kind of big high kick as Morono is swaying out of the way of something as he is wont to do, and him just picking up takedowns, I think are probably on balance. I'm going to pick him to win. But
when in doubt, go for the good athlete too. I mean, none of the guys who have KO'd Buckley or even beaten him have been anywhere close to as poorly gifted as Morono is.
Yeah, it's DiCirico is basically it, but he's also much bigger.
DiCirico is a pretty good athlete. He's just he's even more dysfunctional than Buckley.
Yep.
His game is just super low output and passive, and he just happened to time Buckley perfectly. But he's a pretty strong, fast, powerful fighter. Yeah, okay, but I'll take Morono. I do, in fact, I'm picking Morono largely because I like him. But I like you said, I think it's actually it's a pretty realistic notion that he could beat Buckley, because Buckley, he just can't change, and his problems have been violently exploited in multiple fights. And like most MMA fighters, he has taken a sort of roundabout way where he's added in more wrestling. But I don't know how well that really complements or addresses the issues he's had. So I think Kevin Holland, if he fought like Jack Della Maddalena, even with Kevin Holland's susceptibility to wrestling, I'd still pick him to beat Joaquin Buckley.
Again?
Yeah, that's what I mean. I would still pick him to pick Joaquin Buckley, as in he already did it once before.
Yes.
I think Buckley still loses that fight. With what little he's added. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We appreciate all of you joining us for this. Next week, we will be back to talk about Dawson, Bobby Green. Fingers crossed. We don't have to talk about a Grant Dawson win. Fingers crossed that if we do, we get to talk about a Grant Dawson win where he suffered a horrible round at some point. Coming up after that, in fact, is this fight even next week? It's not. We have talked in advance.
What?
I know. We've duped ourselves into talking about this. So how about this? Next week, there's no more to talk about from Dawson Grain. You don't even know that card's happening yet, the listener that you are. So we're going to direct you now. Come back and listen to this next week. And then next week, we're going to have to find something fun to talk about. We're going to have to pick some topics, find some non-UFC fights. Who knows what that is first, but how about this? If you're one of the assholes in our YouTube comments, or one of the generally much nicer people who interact with us on Twitter, let us know if you have any things you would like to hear us talk about. Anything's going on in the sport right now, in other combat sports right now, and we will come in prepped and come in with something other than just sticking to the UFC schedule. Otherwise, you want to do that, you know where to find the YouTube videos. The show is called Heavy Hands, by the way, in case you didn't notice that yet. On Twitter, you can find us at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil at Boxing Bush. That's me. Check out the Patreon. You are going to hear more, a little bit from the Dawson Green undercard, but especially from the Fiziev Gamrot undercard from last week on the Patreon. And until next week, we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you came here today for the finer points of the face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. That's so funny. We mentioned it last week. Steph mentioned it to me and Zane on the Vivi. Like, oh, we have a week off next week.
You son of a bitch.
And I just forgot it. And you didn't mention it. You didn't know. Why is it my fault?
I expect, because no one told me. No, I didn't have a staff being like, oh, I'm off next week.
Did Zane reach out to you about doing a Depressed tomorrow?
Yes.
Oh, he did? Okay, cool. So then you really should have